A new group of human remains has been discovered on the plain of jars in Laos.
Scattered across the highlands of northern Laos are thousands of stone jars, some weighing over 30 tons, carved centuries ago. For decades, their purpose baffled researchers. Were they storage vessels or sacred monuments? Recent excavations shattered assumptions when one jar revealed the remains of 37 people buried for centuries, offering a glimpse into a complex funerary tradition. What does this discovery mean for understanding a culture lost to time, and how does it rewrite the story these silent giants have guarded? The enigmatic stone jars. High in the mountains of northern Laos, thousands of giant stone jars are scattered across the landscape, some weighing more than 30 tons and standing over 10 feet tall. These monumental vessels were carved centuries ago without the aid of modern machinery, their sheer size and volume leaving us with immediate questions. Why were these jars made? Who carved them? And what purpose did they serve? Their mysterious presence dominates fields, hilltops, and ridges, often arranged alone or clustered by the hundreds, making this a uniquely grand and puzzling archaeological site. The jars vary remarkably in size and composition. While most are carved from sandstone, others consist of granite, limestone, or conglomerate, a rock formed from cemented stone fragments. This variety tells us that different ancient communities, living over a wide region and across centuries, crafted these imposing monuments using local materials. The distinct styles of jar rims and shapes further confirm that there was no single workshop or standardized blueprint. Rather, many groups put their unique signatures on these jars as time went on. Many of the jar sites are relatively modest, holding only a handful of jars, but a few places contain vast clusters exceeding 200 jars, highlighting diverse patterns of use and importance within the region. Transporting and carving these massive stones, some weighing as much as a loaded truck without modern tools or animals bred for hauling, remains a profound challenge to imagine. The logistics alone add another layer to the mystery of why these jars were made and moved in the first place. Despite their imposing presence, most jars are hollow, with no clear contents visible. This emptiness confounds simple theories about their function. At first glance, they might resemble storage containers or water reservoirs, practical uses that make intuitive sense given their size. Yet, the remote and elevated locations where many jars sit challenge notions of everyday use. Their placement in the landscape invites deeper questions about their symbolic or ritual significance. For almost a century, these silent giants have kept their secrets. Researchers walking among them face the daunting task of piecing a story together from clues both near and far. The Plain of Jars, officially inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2019, represents not just a collection of stone vessels, but a sprawling, evolving cultural landscape rich with unanswered questions. As new sites emerge from dense forest and rugged terrain, the scale and mystery continue to grow. Local guides often share legends of giants who carved these jars to brew rice wine after battles, tales rich with imagination but disconnected from archaeological evidence. While such folklore adds to the jar's mystique, real science demands tangible proof. For decades, empty jars resisted all attempts to reveal their original use, leaving the mystery unsolved and open to speculation. It became clear that only a breakthrough discovery could change this narrative. The jars are not merely isolated objects. They exist alongside carved stone discs, burial pits, and ancient graves littered with pottery shards and fragments of human bone. These features hint at a connection to death and remembrance, suggesting that the jars might have played a role in funerary practices. Yet, despite this circumstantial evidence, no one had found a jar that actually contained the dead. Until recently, this absence of direct evidence inside the jars formed a wedge of doubt that challenged even the most reasonable theories. Each empty jar excavated chipped away at the once widely accepted funerary function, creating a riddle that begged for a solution. What had these timeless stone giants really been built for? And why were their interiors so nearly devoid of clues? The answer promised to be far more complicated than anyone anticipated. But what researchers discovered would finally force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about these silent sentinels. Early research and theories. The jars captured scientific attention first in the 30s, when a French archaeologist named Madeleine Colani undertook a detailed survey of the region. Colani didn't simply catalog the impressive stone vessels. She explored the surrounding landscape, where she found burial pits, carved stone discs, cremated bone fragments, and grave goods like pottery and jewelry. These findings led her to propose a bold hypothesis. The jars were linked to ancient funerary practices, and the landscape as a whole was a memorial site honoring the dead. Colani's work marked a turning point by transforming the plain of jars from a regional curiosity into a subject of serious study. Her comprehensive map and numbering system remain the basis for archaeological research today. Although her funerary theory became the leading explanation, a critical problem persisted. The jars themselves rarely contained human remains. The burial evidence lay near the jars, but the hollow jars were mostly empty or held fragmentary, uninformative debris. This inconsistency sparked decades of debate and limited further fieldwork. For years, archaeologists struggled with this gap between the surrounding funerary features and the silent emptiness within the jars. Was it possible that the jars served only as markers or symbolic monuments near the burials, rather than containers for remains? Such a distinction, while subtle, would shift how the entire site was understood. In 1994, renewed research led by Professor A.G. Nitta and Lao archaeologist Thongsa Sayavangkamdi provided new observations. They noted that the burial pits appeared to have been dug after the jars were placed, suggesting the jars might function as commemorative monuments rather than physical containers. This nuanced interpretation moved the conversation from jars as tombs to jars as markers of memory and loss. However, these ideas still fell short of a definitive answer. Between the jars' emptiness and the surrounding graves, the mystery deepened. Some jars had scattered bone fragments, but nothing resembling a consistent burial. Meanwhile, alternative theories gained traction. Speculation included the jars being used for storing food or wine, collecting rainwater, or marking military victories. Some proposed they were ritual fermentation vessels, though none of these ideas gained strong physical evidence to back them. Local legends added colorful but unscientific explanations. Tales of giants brewing rice wine using the jars enlivened the imagination but failed to provide archaeological proof. These stories, respected as cultural heritage, stand apart from evidence-based understanding. Without tangible artifacts inside the jars, the funerary interpretation remained an educated guess, competing with a range of plausible yet untested theories. This stalemate created a frustrating reality for researchers. The plain of jars was a fascinating puzzle, half solved, but lacking its crucial piece. The jar's silence was louder than ever, urging archaeologists to find that one discovery that could finally tip the balance. Until then, the jars held their secrets close, as they had for centuries. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, scientific technologies advanced, and new research initiatives began to take shape. It was only a matter of time before these advanced tools and methods would breathe new life into the ancient mystery, allowing researchers to uncover clues that had remained hidden for centuries. The persistent mystery. For decades after Colani's groundbreaking survey, actual excavation and research at the jar sites were sporadic and limited. Decades passed with only a few teams daring to return to these remote fields, slowed not just by logistical challenges, but by the sheer scale of the mystery itself. Without concrete findings inside the jars, many questions remained frustratingly out of reach. The archaeological world was caught between theory and inconclusive evidence. Each time a team carefully opened a jar, they often found it empty, or nearly so, deepening the puzzle. Instead of adding clarity, these negative results chipped away at confidence, creating doubt about the funerary theory's validity. The lack of consistent content made the jars seem like silent monuments, whose original meaning was slipping through the fingers of time. Researchers faced the paradox of compelling external funerary features alongside hollow central vessels. Despite these challenges, the scale and distinctiveness of the jars kept attracting interest. Over 2,000 jars had been documented across more than 100 sites in Chiengkuang province, but surveys continued to reveal even more, some previously unknown and deeply hidden in inaccessible terrain. This expanding inventory highlighted the jars' widespread cultural importance, yet also underscored how little was truly understood about the phenomenon. While multiple burial pits and grave goods surrounded the jars, contradictions lingered. The jars themselves resisted simple categorization. Some experts argued the jars were not functional in mortuary practices, but served as symbolic markers. Others considered that the jars might have multiple uses over time, reflecting changing cultural traditions. With no clear residue or tool signatures pointing to a single purpose, the jars invited speculation from every possible angle. Interest grew in the physical and geological aspects of the jars, too. Researchers noted that many jars were carved far from their final resting places, transported over rugged terrain without the benefit of draft animals or wheeled vehicles. Ancient quarries dotted the region, including some still housing incomplete jars. How these massive stones were moved remains an engineering mystery, revealing another layer of complexity. Why invest such monumental effort unless the jars held immense cultural significance? The world wars of the 20th century and the more recent conflicts in the area also left their mark. The region remains littered with unexploded ordnance, turning many jar sites into dangerous zones that slow archaeological work and limit access. These modern legacies add urgency and difficulty to research, reminding us that even ancient mysteries are intertwined with contemporary histories. Alternative theories proliferated in the absence of definitive answers. Some suggested the jars were communal storage for harvested goods, while others imagined they were designed for large-scale feasts or rituals involving rice wine fermentation. Some of these ideas were inspired by ethnographic parallels or local lore, but lacked consistent archaeological support. The mystery hardened into a story of possibilities without certainties. Yet, the enduring allure of these stone giants persisted. Their presence signaled a culture rich with tradition, expertise, and symbolism, waiting patiently to reveal its story. Archaeologists knew that with new approaches and more patient excavation, the puzzle's critical piece might one day come to light, changing how we understand not just the jars, but the people who created them. The stage was set for a breakthrough, one that would finally bridge the gap between theory and proof, silence and story. Renewed archaeological efforts. After decades of limited exploration, a major turning point arrived in 2016 when a team of Australian and Lao researchers launched the Plain of Jars Archaeological Research Project. This ambitious multi-year effort wasn't a simple excavation, but a comprehensive study combining detailed mapping, GPS location data, radiocarbon dating, and geological analysis. Their aim was to provide the first systematic, large-scale investigation of the jar sites, moving beyond fragmented surveys toward a clear, datable picture of this still elusive culture. The collaboration united experts from the University of Melbourne, the Australian National University, James Cook University, and the University of Otago, with Laos's Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism. Together, they inventoried numerous megalithic sites across the region, geolocating individual jars and meticulously recording physical details like shape, size, and carving style. This approach began to reveal that the jars were part of a vast and complex tradition extending far beyond the small sample most visitors had ever seen. More than 20 previously undocumented jar sites emerged from this new survey, showing that the true scale of the plain of jars was still unfolding. The boundaries of the officially recognized UNESCO World Heritage Property cover only a portion of the region's known jars, estimated at over 2,000 and growing. New finds deepened understanding, but also raised fresh questions about how this ancient tradition developed across space and time. Early excavations under the project also found signs supporting the funerary theory. At Site 1, the best-known and most visited location near Fonsavan, previous digs uncovered the remains of at least 18 individuals, mostly infants and children, buried in surrounding pits and nestled among stones and pottery. Though these burials were outside the jars themselves, their presence reinforced the idea that the jars were key features within a broader mortuary landscape. Despite these advances, the core mystery persisted. None of the excavated jars had yet produced solid evidence of human remains inside their hollow chambers. This absence continued to frustrate archaeologists hoping to confirm whether the jars acted as actual burial containers or merely symbolized the dead. The silence within the jars still spoke loudly, urging researchers to press on. Scientists adopted a patient, methodical pace during excavation, fully aware that any discovery might reshape decades of assumptions. The team undertook painstaking, careful digs and surveys, each step designed to preserve context and gather as much data as possible. Their dedication set the stage for a discovery that would be as surprising as it was definitive. This carefully constructed foundation of research, combining old and new techniques, allowed the plain of jars to move from legend and speculation towards scientific clarity. It revealed a landscape alive with human history, awaiting the moment when its deepest secret would finally emerge. It was only a matter of time before the breakthrough jar would be found, one that held more than mystery. It held the voices of the past. The discovery at Site 75. That breakthrough came at a remote location known as Site 75, about 70 kilometers northeast of Fonsavan. Here, researchers focused on an unusually large stone jar carved from conglomerate rock, standing around 1.3 meters tall and stretching over 2 meters wide at its base. Excavations from 2022 to 2024 slowly revealed what no other jar had shown before: densely packed human bones and teeth resting at the bottom. Not scattered fragments, but a complex, disarticulated mass. Alongside the skeletal remains were a variety of burial objects: fragments of earthenware, stone slabs, an iron knife, a small copper-based bell, and 20 glass beads. These artifacts, combined with detailed osteological analysis, allowed researchers to estimate a minimum of 37 individuals were present in the jar. These ranged from infants as young as 18 months to adults. An entire community's worth of ancestors laid to rest together. Radiocarbon dating placed the interments over multiple phases spanning roughly 270 years, between approximately AD 890 and AD 1160. This prolonged time span showed the jar wasn't a single-use monument, but rather a site revisited and reused across generations, underscoring its role in a complex burial ritual that endured for centuries. The discovery was groundbreaking not only for the quantity of remains, but also for their condition and context. The bones were disarticulated and jumbled, not arranged as complete skeletons, an indication that the bodies decomposed elsewhere before the bones were collected and placed in the jar. Known as secondary burial, this practice reflects cultural traditions observed historically and ethnographically throughout Southeast Asia. Nearby, researchers uncovered a cluster of 7 smaller stone jars around 500 meters from the large vessel. These smaller jars contained no human remains, but may represent an earlier stage in the burial process. This suggests a multi-stage mortuary ritual: initial interment or exposure, followed by the collection and placement of bones into larger communal jars. The pattern suggests the jar at Site 75 was tied to some familial or kinship-driven practice, brought out again and again like it was an ancestral shrine. The group came back repeatedly to place their dead beside relatives who had passed decades or even centuries earlier. That shared memory locked in stone ends up turning the jars from lone, standalone monuments into kind of living signs of identity and home. This jar also seemed to match funerary activity seen at other Plain of Jars locations, so it points to a regional tradition that carried on for centuries. The material collected at Site 75 gave solid support to a guess that had been around for almost 100 years. At least some of the jars really did serve a funerary purpose, wrapped up with long-term remembrance habits. The team, guided by Nicholas Scopel and connected to James Cook University and the Australian National University, put out their results in 2026 in Antiquity, titled The Death Jar, a new mortuary tradition at the Plain of Jars, Laos PDR. The peer review backed up the reliability of both dating and interpretation. So this find became the closest thing to a smoking gun the archaeology crowd has ever had for these confusing monuments. With this discovery transforming our understanding, the next puzzle lies in unraveling the details of the burial rituals themselves and what they mean for the people who created this extraordinary legacy. Understanding the burial rituals. The discovery at Site 75 offered a rare glimpse into burial practices that had long been debated. The scattered and jumbled arrangement of bones inside the jar suggested a ritual known as secondary burial. In this practice, bodies weren't placed in their final resting place right after death. Instead, the deceased were left elsewhere to decompose, and later their bones were gathered and interred ceremonially. Secondary burial is a well-documented ritual found in various cultures throughout Southeast Asia, both past and present. The jar's contents, disarticulated bones missing some body parts, fit this pattern perfectly. This indicated that the jars didn't serve as primary tombs, but played an intermediate role in a broader funerary process involving multiple steps and locations. Interestingly, the site also contained a cluster of 7 smaller jars nearby, which contained no human remains. Archaeologists suggest that these smaller jars might have been used in an earlier stage of burial, possibly for initial interment or exposure. This supports the idea of a multi-step mortuary ritual, where the dead pass through different phases before reaching their final resting place in the larger jar. The physical evidence showed that the large jar was reused repeatedly. Radiocarbon dates indicate it was used over nearly 3 centuries, spanning about 10 generations. This implies a communal or family lineage maintained a continual ancestral tradition, returning to the same vessel to place their dead alongside previous generations. This ongoing involvement reflects a deep connection between the living and their ancestors, rooted not only in remembrance, but in ritual acts that reinforced identity and community continuity. The jar functioned as a kind of ancestral shrine, binding generations together through shared mortuary rites. Evidence of burial goods like pottery shards, an iron knife, a copper bell, and imported glass beads adds extra depth to the tale. These bits point toward social rank, or maybe symbolic meanings tied to the people who were laid there, so it feels like death was wrapped in a pretty involved ceremonial life. The glass beads, in particular, suggest links stretching out for thousands of kilometers away, connecting that remote plateau with wider exchange routes. The jar at Site 75 also matches burial finds from other Plain of Jars locations, which points to a shared, consistent funerary practice that stayed strong across the region. That kind of evidence pushes back on older thinking that treated the jars as isolated quirks or just simple landscape markers. Even if the jar's contents told a lot, they also left gaps about cultural meanings and about how these rites changed as time moved on. Going back to the same jar for centuries implies steady customs, but still, the jar's earliest builders and the wider shape of their beliefs are only partly visible. More mysteries lingered in the landscape, reflecting both practical challenges and unanswered questions about the jar's origins and usage. Unanswered questions and challenges. Despite the breakthrough at Site 75, many puzzles remain about the Plain of Jars. One major uncertainty is who originally carved these jars and exactly when each was made. Although the jars are generally dated between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE, the human remains inside Site 75 date from much later, between AD 890 and 1160. This significant gap suggests many jars may have stood unused for centuries before being incorporated into burial rituals. The reason behind this delayed reuse is unclear. Some jars may have functioned as landscape markers or sacred sites long before funerary practices evolved around them. How meanings attached to the jars were passed down, rediscovered, or reinterpreted by later generations remains an open and fascinating question for researchers. Another mystery involves why some sites house hundreds of jars while others hold only a few. The causes behind these dramatic differences could relate to social structures, clan territories, or varying cultural practices. Yet, no definitive explanation has emerged, leaving room for further investigation. Transportation of the jars adds a monumental layer of complexity. Many were carved far from where they now stand, based on geological evidence tracing stone sources to distant quarries. Moving these multi-ton objects across rugged hills and dense forests without wheels, draft animals, or metal machinery must have required extraordinary communal effort and ingenuity. The exact methods used to transport such massive stones remain uncertain. Some scholars propose rolling systems, wooden sledges, or rope-assisted hauling, but direct physical evidence, such as tracks or abandoned tools, has not been found. This challenge emphasizes the skill and determination of the prehistoric communities involved. Modern history imposes its own barriers. The Plain of Jars lies in one of the most heavily bombed areas on Earth, due to extensive bombing campaigns during the Vietnam War. Millions of unexploded cluster munitions still contaminate many jar fields, rendering large areas too dangerous for excavation or visitation. This hazard has severely limited archaeological research. Clearance of unexploded ordnance is a slow, costly, and ongoing process, which has left many sites inaccessible decades after hostilities ended. The efforts to make these landscapes safe intertwine with the preservation and study of ancient heritage, showing how past and present collide. Even the UNESCO World Heritage designation in 2019 was shaped by these realities, balancing the protection of cultural sites with the necessity for ordnance clearance. Only a fraction of known jar sites have been thoroughly excavated or opened for tourism because of this. Every excavation represents not just science, but careful negotiation with a dangerous environment. Researchers remain candid about these limits and uncertainties. They recognize that Site 75 is only one piece of a vast puzzle still being uncovered. The jars hold many secrets about their makers, their cultural roles, and the social contexts that gave rise to this extraordinary tradition. The story continues to unfold, inviting future generations to explore a landscape where history, mystery, and resilience meet. This intricate reality pushes the search beyond simple answers, leading us deeper into the story of a people whose stone giants still speak across time, waiting to share more of their enduring legacy. What the future holds. The groundbreaking discovery at Site 75 has opened a new chapter in understanding the Plain of Jars, but it also marks just the beginning of what promises to be a deeper and more complex exploration. Researchers are now planning DNA analysis on the recovered remains to determine whether the 37 individuals buried together were related. This genetic insight could confirm or challenge the idea that the jar served as a family tomb or kinship shrine, adding a personal dimension to this ancient communal practice. Alongside DNA studies, isotope analysis promises to reveal where those buried spent their lives. Certain isotopes in teeth and bones reflect the water and food consumed in childhood, acting like geographic fingerprints. This could show whether the individuals lived locally on the plateau or if some were brought from distant places, offering clues about migration, trade networks, or cultural connections extending far beyond Laos. Further radiocarbon dating and broader excavations at other jar sites are also planned. These efforts aim to understand how widespread and consistent burial traditions were across the plain of jars, and whether practices varied by location or changed over time. Identifying multiple undisturbed jars, like the one at Site 75, could fundamentally reshape how we see this ancient landscape. The artifacts found alongside the bones, the iron knife, copper bell, and glass beads, will undergo closer examination as well. The imported beads hint at connections reaching as far as South India and Mesopotamia, thousands of kilometers away. This raises fascinating questions about the plateau's role in ancient trade routes and cultural exchanges, revealing a society not isolated, but engaged in long-distance networks. New surveys continue to discover previously unknown jar fields in areas still contaminated by unexploded bombs. Because of these dangers, many promising sites remain off-limits, suggesting that more discoveries like Site 75 may be waiting beneath the surface, untouched. Each new find will help fill gaps in the story and refine archaeological priorities for future research. The combination of archaeological excavation, DNA analysis, isotopic studies, and artifact research promises a multidimensional understanding of the plain of jars. It moves the narrative beyond speculation, providing tangible, scientific evidence about who the people were, their lifestyles, and how they honored their dead. This collaborative, interdisciplinary approach exemplifies modern archaeology's potential to uncover complex human stories. So the jars still keep a lot of secrets, but the thing found at Site 75 is kind of, well, a proof of concept that this kind of detailed insight is real and maybe not just theory. It kind of pushes researchers to go for more exploration, and it makes skeptics stop and think again about those old doubts. The jars, once silent, are now speaking with this new clarity. Like, suddenly, the air is different. What comes next is not only about chasing fresh discoveries, it's also about preserving these sites, because there's this entanglement, ancient heritage tangled up with more recent history, and especially with unexploded ordnance contamination, everything needs careful and sustained effort if we want to protect and study these treasures safely. In practice, it feels like a race against time, to understand and conserve a cultural heritage that lived through millennia, but still stays vulnerable all the same. This moment isn't really an end, more like a fresh beginning. As technology keeps moving and research keeps widening, our picture of the plain of jars should get richer and more vivid. What used to be a mystery is turning into a human story, told through stone, bone, and the plain dedication of the people who study them. The giant stone jars of Laos have guarded their secrets for centuries, but thanks to patient research and a remarkable discovery, we're finally unlocking their story. These massive monuments were more than stone. They were vessels of memory, community, and identity across generations. If you found this journey into ancient mystery fascinating, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories where science brings the past to life.